The scanning system showed something impossible on the edge of the violet star system, and Katie Morgan leaned forward in her chair as the data scrolled across her screen. The structure was massive and silent, and clearly not natural, but it was, sending out a signal that had repeated for what the computer estimated to be almost 300 years. Commander Blake Harrison stood behind her and studied the readings with narrowed eyes before giving the order to approach with caution. The research vessel moved closer, and Katie felt her heart rate increase as the station came into view through the observation windows. And it was beautiful in a haunting way, with architecture that seemed to flow like frozen water. They docked after 2 hours of careful maneuvering, and Katie suited up with Dr. Marcus Webb and 2 security officers named Chris Palmer and Linda Hayes. The airlock opened with a hiss, and they stepped into corridors that still had power running through them, and the lights flickered to life as they walked as if the station had been waiting for someone to return. Katie noticed the writing on the walls was elegant and curved, and completely unlike any language humanity had encountered before. They followed the distress signal deeper into the station and found rooms filled with what looked like art and scientific equipment and personal belongings that suggested this had been a living community once. Then they found the bodies, thousands of them preserved in some kind of stasis field that had failed, and Katie felt her stomach turn as she realized they were looking at the remains of an entire civilization. Marcus scanned one of the bodies, and his voice came through the radio with confusion because the biological readings were similar to human but different in ways that suggested parallel evolution on a world very far from Earth. They moved past the memorial chambers and found a single cryopod still active in the center of what appeared to be a medical facility. Katie approached it slowly and wiped the frost from the viewing panel and found herself looking at a face that was both alien and strangely familiar. The being inside had pale blue skin and silver hair, and features that were delicate and beautiful in a way that made Katie catch her breath. Marcus checked the pod systems and confirmed it was stable, and after a long discussion with Commander Harrison, they made the decision to transport it back to their ship. The revival process took 6 hours, and Katie stayed in the medical bay the entire time and watched his color slowly return to the alien woman's skin. Her eyes opened suddenly, and they were a deep violet color and filled with confusion and fear, and she tried to sit up too. Quickly and nearly fell, Katie moved forward with her hands raised in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace, and spoke softly even though she knew the woman could not understand her words yet. The alien woman stared at Katie for a long moment, and then touched a device on her wrist, and suddenly words formed in Katie's mind, not through her ears but directly in her thoughts. "My name is Lyrian, and I am the last of my people, and I have been waiting so long for someone to find me." Katie felt tears prick her eyes at the sadness in those projected words, and she introduced herself and explained how they had found the station. Lyrian listened and then slowly stood on shaking legs and asked to see her people one final time, even though she knew they were gone. Commander Harrison granted the request, and they returned to the station together. And Lyrian walked through the memorial chambers with a grace that spoke of deep grief held carefully in check. She stopped before one of the stasis fields and placed her hand against it and explained through the translation device that this was her mother and her father and her siblings, and everyone she had ever known. Katie stayed close and listened as Lyrian told the story of the plague that had swept through her species and how it had not killed them directly, but had instead made them sterile and unable to produce offspring. The Zephyrians had tried everything to save themselves, and their best scientists had worked for decades, searching for a cure. But one by one the population had dwindled as the elderly died and no children were born to replace them. Lyrian had been placed in cryostasis because she possessed a rare genetic mutation that made her immune to the sterilization effects, and the last survivors had hoped that someday another species might find them, and perhaps help. They returned to the ship, and Marcus began running detailed genetic analyses, while Lyrian recovered her strength and learned to speak English. Through the translation device, which adapted quickly to human language patterns, Katie spent hours with her learning about Zephyrian culture and history and art, and she was amazed by the sophistication and beauty of everything Lyrian described. Zephyrians had been a peaceful species focused on science and philosophy, and they had never developed weapons of war because they had never encountered another intelligent species to fight with. 3 days after the revival, Marcus called an emergency meeting in the conference room, and his expression was a strange mixture of excitement and concern. He displayed his findings on the main screen and explained that human and Zephyrian DNA were compatible in a way that should have been impossible given that they had evolved on worlds separated by thousands of light years. The genetic similarities suggested either incredible coincidence or something more deliberate and ancient. Lyran looked at the data with wide eyes and then explained that her people had ancient legends about the seeders who had traveled the galaxy in the time before time and had planted the foundations of life on countless worlds. She had always thought they were just stories, but perhaps there was truth in them after all. Commander Harrison asked the obvious question about whether this compatibility meant what he thought it meant. Marcus confirmed that in theory, a human and Zephyrian could produce viable offspring, and the child would carry genetic traits from both species. The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications. Lyraean stood slowly and her hands trembled as she spoke, and Katie could hear the desperation beneath her careful control. I know I have no right to ask this of you, and I know it is an enormous request to make of strangers. But my entire species rests on the edge of extinction, and I am the only one left who can carry our genetic legacy forward. Katie felt her chest tighten as she looked at Lyrian's face and saw the weight of being the last of her kind written in every line of her expression. The commander said they needed time to discuss this among themselves, and Lyran nodded and left the conference room with dignity and tact, despite the obvious pain. The debate lasted for hours, and some crew members argued that this was beyond their mission parameters, while others felt they had a moral obligation to help. Katie found herself thinking about what it would mean to be the last human alive, and to watch everyone she had ever known die, and to face the complete erasure of everything her species had ever accomplished. She made her decision then. When the meeting reconvened, Katie stood and said she would volunteer if Lyran was willing, and if the medical team confirmed, it would be safe for both of them. Marcus ran extensive tests over the next week and confirmed that the procedure would work and that both Katie and any resulting child would be healthy. Lyran cried when Katie told her, and for the first time since her revival, she seemed to let go of some of the terrible control she had been maintaining. They spent time together preparing, and Katie learned more about Zephyrian customs and beliefs, and she was struck by how similar they were to human values. In many ways, the Zephyrians believed in community and in preserving knowledge and in treating all life with respect and dignity. The medical procedure was handled with professionalism and care, and Katie was surprised by how nervous she felt when the day finally arrived. Lyran held her hand and thanked her with words that came from a place deeper than language. The weeks that followed were strange and wonderful, and Katie found herself growing close to Lyran in ways she had not expected. They talked late into the night cycles about everything from science to art, to what it meant to create a new generation that would carry two species forward. Marcus confirmed the pregnancy after 30 days, and the entire crew celebrated because it meant they had achieved something unprecedented in human history. Lyran seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders, and she threw herself into teaching the crew about Zephyrian culture and technology. She shared star maps that showed worlds the Zephyrians had explored, and scientific principles that were decades ahead of human understanding. Commander Harrison reported everything to Earth Command, and after much deliberation, they agreed to establish formal first contact protocols and to welcome Lyran as a representative of her people. Katie watched her belly grow over the months and felt the baby move inside her, and she knew she had made the right choice. Lyrian was there for every moment, and her excitement and wonder were infectious, and the crew found themselves invested in the pregnancy as if the child belonged to all of them. When labor finally came, it was long and difficult, but Katie held on, and Lyrian never left her side. The baby was born, with a cry that echoed through the medical bay, and Marcus held her up with tears streaming down his face. She had pale lavender skin and dark hair, and when she opened her eyes, they were a striking mix of human brown and Zephyrian violet. Lyran sobbed as she held the infant and whispered words in her native language that the translator rendered as blessings and promises. Katie looked at her daughter and at Lyrian and at the crew gathered around them, and